When application completion rates drop, something is off. Students aren't getting the support they need, and that's affecting your numbers. Enter Element 451's AI assistants. They step in where students struggle, offering real-time answers and advice, guiding them through every step. Learn how AI assistants can boost your enrollment outcomes. Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. My guest today is somebody I'm happy to call a friend, a colleague, and probably the person who I know is most passionate about higher ed branding. It's Joe Master. He's the Senior Vice President of Brand Management at Carnegie. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Shane. I haven't seen you in a while. It's great to be here with you.
Likewise, Joe. And I should mention, Joe is also Vice President of and fellow board member of mine on the Cup Wrap board. So a reminder really for everybody listening, register for that conference. It's coming up in March. Shameless plug. But happy to serve there with Joe. And Joe, let's jump right into higher ed brands. This is kind of your sweet spot. It's the thing you eat, sleep, and breathe. And so, from a high level perspective, what do we get right as an industry, and what do we get wrong? Where do we need to improve in terms of institutions and telling our own story of our institutions?
All right, so I'm going to treat this almost like a brand workshop, Shane. So the first thing I'd say is let's ease into that question first. So brands should have connective tissue. It should be human, and it should be personal. So I want to think about your brand first. So, one, I want to congratulate you on the birth of your son.
Thank you.
I know that Miss Rachel now has a Mr. Easton. So you're not just girl dad now, you're boy dad too.
That's right.
I've known you for a while, and there's a few things that I've known about you. One, you always talk about your family first and foremost, like in every conversation I've ever had with you. And and your children now are famous for being on video calls with you, right?
That's right.
You either hear them, there's some kind of sensory, it's either audio or visual. They're present, right? And that's really important to you. They're present in your life, they're present in your mind as part of your decision making. I know you love sports. I know that you
to my own detriment, I do.
To Philly sports as well, as a fellow Philly sports fan. We meet at the bar. And then, you're passionate about higher education, and while you've done a lot of great work in grad marketing, I know that you've peered over that fence and that you think about the whole vertical as well, which is why you host this podcast. So when you asked that question about what does higher ed get right? That was the question, right?
That was the question.
And where do we need to improve, right? As an industry, the first thing is getting away from the personal. So here's what we've gotten right as a vertical. Our understanding and sincere belief that a college education is a profoundly transformative experience that transcends the classroom. So retail brands, insurance brands, lifestyle brands, most brands in the world would kill to have our mission, our values. Yet look at how insurance sells itself. How long has State Farm been a good neighbor? Who's on your side? Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide, that's it. Yeah.
What's the safest car out there? Did you see that Volvo commercial?
I did. I was gonna bring that up with you. I think sometimes, and you're talking about the mission of the institution. It's the Volvo example, and I could link that in the show notes that you shared a couple weeks ago is a perfect example. I had no idea it was a car commercial until the last 30 seconds of the commercial, because they're not selling you a car, they're selling you safety and security.
Right. And that's their, whether you call it articulation or essence, we're bogged down with language. At its core, Volvo cars are safe, right? But when we get back to higher education, we have failed as a sector to translate this wonderful mission, vision, values into brands that make people feel something. So what we do is, I often say, we focus on the features, not the feelings. Like, we have a lot of, pursue your passions and be a change maker. And like, why? To what end? So like, what are the advantages of being a change maker? What is the advantage of pursuing your passion? But, to what end? So we talk about these features all the time. So the largest silo is not in the macro, it's in the micro. It's how we as an industry isolate ourselves from other verticals. We're comparative to a fault, to the point of self-destruction. We let's look at staffing. We look for higher ed experience above all else. Is that what we need right now? We take marketing and branding cues from other universities that we compare ourselves to. And we come to strategic partners like me now and say, I want to do what that school does. And that's the wrong way of thinking about it. But you asked the question, so I want to take it a step further. So I posted about this on LinkedIn too. I think that we are in the middle of something that is a shift, and it's not just specific to higher education. It's a concern I've had since COVID that has been growing. We're not just isolating ourselves as a vertical. We are ourselves isolated. We are siloed from each other as human beings. We meet more than we ever have. We have Zoom now and Teams and whatever the hell this platform is, Riverside, but we feel less. Yeah. We establish less human connection. We're less empowered to be helpful to others. And because everything is ephemeral now, nothing is personal. And we're not automata. We are feeling beings, and marketing and branding are intensely personal things. So I think that we're in the middle of this Milankovitch cycle. And basically that is what NASA would talk about, these cumulative changes in the Earth's movement and the impact on climate over thousands of years. It has to do with eccentricity and axial tilt and precession. But I believe that right now, in 2024, 2025, when this publishes, we're dealing with changes in the eccentricity of our orbits interpersonally, and we are more connected than ever before, but we collaborate less and we feel less.
Yeah, luckily we can connect like this in a podcast on Riverside, but you're right. I mean, when I was, like, a good example, I had to miss the first day of our Cup Wrap board retreat this summer because of travel issues. It was just weird not being in the room. I made the drive the next morning at the crack of dawn to get that connectivity with new colleagues, and so yeah, you're right. We have the ability to connect with people more than ever, but it's not really connection when you're staring at a grid of faces over Zoom.
I'm glad you brought that up, Shane, because think about that. You were a new member of the board, right? And I believe this was at a time where, it's always at some point in the cycle, but it was at a busy time, right? Yeah. It was in the summer. You coming there, you getting in your car and driving there, what did that show? It showed commitment. It showed passion for what you were doing. You showed not told. It's showing not telling. That was a moment of connection among the board that was really authentic. And when you were on the screen the first day of the retreat, it didn't feel authentic for you to jump in when you're the only talking head on the screen.
It's a good segue because we're talking about collaboration. That's the point of the show. We're talking about breaking silos. So talk about how branding projects, rebrands, good brand work kind of automatically or by default creates collaboration, and how should institutions approach those type of projects with that really being the point to kind of synthesize the organization?
All right. So like brand is such a bad word in higher education. So is marketing.
So is marketing.
Right. So that's one thing that is an issue. So the largest silo again is in institutional thinking. It's in our brains here. So I want to like talk about Rick Rubin for a second. I've gone down this like rabbit hole of Rick Rubin, and I can't tell if he's a genius or a charlatan, but it doesn't matter because, you know, when he talks about creativity, I see a lot of, you know, direct connotations to brand. He talks about how as an artist, if you want to put out the best possible work that's going to resonate with your audience, to write that song or write that sentence for the audience is wrong. You have to write it for yourself. You have to make art that you love, that you're passionate about, and then your audience will be on that wavelength and it will connect. And then you could go into how artists a lot of times on their second record always try to pander to who they sold their first record to, and then you start seeing the degradation of the product. I think in higher education, the thing that we need to think about is that we are drowning in data. We have data on every geo and every demo. We have admissions, decision drivers, motivations. We know to a pinpoint level as a vertical, and if our institutions are lucky enough to have budgets for market research, what people know about us, how they know about us, where they consume their media, and what do we end up doing? We end up trying to cater our messaging to the data that we know, which is categorical data in large measure. You know, we know that across the board, students care about the vibes on a college campus, for instance. Does that mean every institution's brand essence needs to be about vibes? No. So if we think about it, let's liberate ourselves from the word brand and think, if we as an institution can come together and make decisions together that are authentic to us as an institution, then that is the best way foundationally for us to then, through tactical marketing, reach our audiences. So it's coming together and landing first, like, what is our core value proposition? And Shane, you know it. You've worked on a couple campuses. That's really hard for a lot of institutions to do. It doesn't mean you have to have a huge university. You could be a small liberal arts school, and it's hard to land that core value prop, right?
Yeah.
And then let's flex that out. So if you don't have the core value proposition, which is basically this relationship between this is what we give you, so and this is what you get out of it. So how do we then flex that for units? You know, we can't. If we haven't landed that foundational, this is the math of what we do, you know, then how do we get our messaging pillars? And then furthermore, as a community, if we have a messaging pillar that deals with, for instance, community, that's the entire community. So the community needs to be involved. So in terms of collaborating across departments, across campus, if you are trying to start collaboration around a rebrand, that's the wrong time. you know, this needs to be, you know, we need to be building these relationships. I'll take it back to what we first talked about here. Like it's relationship building first so that you can land the math of your brand second.
It's great advice for any project. At Muhlenberg, we're redesigning our website right now. And a colleague of mine, Sarah Wojcik, and I did 15 listening sessions over the summer, just on campus to make sure people were bought in and it felt like, you know, their voice was being heard. But you're right. We're building those relationships so that when the rubber hits the road, we've got the foundation that we need. And you're not just being looped in now and have no idea what's going on. You were aware and your voice was heard.
So I have a question for you. In that listening session, did anything surprise you?
No. I mean, it was productive. Nothing surprised us, which in and of itself is not surprising. Which I mean, it means that we knew kind of what we needed, and we knew what our colleagues wanted and needed. And so there was no real curveballs.
So you didn't have a curve thrown at you. Another question: were there any relationships that you formed through that process, or relationships that were strengthened through that process that gave you some champions for the project?
Yes. Every single listening session, accomplish just that with every department on campus involved. I mean, student life, we were at their quarterly meeting where it's everybody. It's religious life. It's res life. It's all of those groups that we probably don't interact with enough, but now we've built that kind of face-to-face goodwill. And when we need, to them to update content and keep it accurate and all of that good stuff that goes to the website, they're bought in. They've been heard and they feel like they were part of the process.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's going well, right?
Well, it's a good question because I'm sure I know it is because my team is wonderful. As of this recording is my last day of paternity leave, business day. So we'll find out when I go back.
I'm sure it is. I mean, if you do that foundational work, to build the relationships first, everything has to follow from that. People think, even tactical marketing, like when it comes to that, like you will have better results if we want to get into vanity metrics about conversions by having coffee with the people or, like it's that foundational.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned wanting to collaborate as part of a rebrand is probably not the best time. So how does an institution know it's time for a rebrand? I think a lot of times if there's a leadership change or if there's a new, CMO that comes on board, the first thought is let's rebrand, but it's not always the right time. So how does an institution know when it's the right time to either rebrand fully or at least look at their brand and how they're leveraging it?
Oh, wow. You're just throwing me like tiny little questions, right? All right. So one, you said it. Let's be honest here. Way too often rebrands are enacted because of new leadership, and be it at the top or at the Marcom level or even in the advancement level. So you've got people in cabinet who come into new roles, and that's not the best reason, nor a great or good reason. When the slightest breeze of change blows, the rebrand isn't launched, or it dies on the vine. So the thing that I want to know is, what are your goals? What institutionally are your goals? If your goals are vanity, then you'll have vanity metrics galore to stroke your ego, but it'll fail. If your goal is elevating reputation, raising awareness, familiarity, and understanding of like what you stand for and who you stand for, then that bodes better. So the data of the greatest value of our institution, that's what we need to be thinking about. So to enact a brand refresh or rebrand, the questions that I'm asking are, I want to know, among audiences, what is awareness of among geographies and demographics of where our students come from? What about familiarity among that audience and geos of those things that we do really well? What is awareness among students in high growth potential markets? What is awareness and familiarity among the general public in these geographies? Do these demos and geos have a positive, neutral, or negative sentiment about our institution? And here's the big one. Nationally, how aware are people of us? Right? So that's the foundational thing. That's what I want to know going into a rebrand, because I have to, if I want to get from point A to point F, I need to know where we are at point A. So if it's not about moving the needle in some way, and it won't work.
Yeah. So Joe, in your experience, and I'm wondering, handling those conversations when you're doing all this research and you're doing the foundational work, and you're finding that this particular institution, whoever it might be, is not in a place for a rebrand. How's that conversation go with probably the president or CMO of that institution? How do you handle those conversations, and what's the message in terms of what else can be done for that institution?
Something I really, really think that, for this answer, I'm going to go back to my in-house days. So I spent almost 13 years at Drexel and Temple. And I remember this conversation at the time we had with John Fry, who's president of Drexel. Funnily, he's president of Temple now. Yeah. I also worked for. And I remember him asking, we had the Ambition Can't Wait campaign, and it was in year maybe 4 or 5 at that point. And we had moved the needle nationally in terms of awareness, familiarity with Drexel's co-op program, right?
Mm.
And special shout out to Craig Campus and Larry Bender and the entire team at UMac at Drexel. But remember John Fry asking, isn't it time for this to go away? And I brought up earlier in this conversation, how long State Farm been a good neighbor? I can't take credit for that phrase because that's exactly what Craig Campus asked John Fry. And I thought it was brilliant. I think that, that could have been a moment where the brand campaign went away and we pivoted into something else. But it was a moment when smart people in a room said the right thing. And we had a president who is amenable and willing to take our counsel. And I think that relationship is so important. I answered it a roundabout way.
No, that's great. I mean, that's perfectly said. You're right. It's, how long has Nike been just doing it? And how long have people been loving McDonald's? All of those iconic standout brands that we think of that just have not run their course, but stuck with what they are good at. And so you're right. I mean, if the institution has new leadership, oftentimes we're like, okay, we got to change the brand. We got to do something. This has run its course. But in reality, if that's not the case, then you're probably doing more damage than good by sort of quote unquote ending that brand.
Yeah, and another thing that I'd say is, now putting on my strategic partner hat, it's okay. We have so much language. You say the word brand, a lot of times people think it's your logo and, visual architecture system. And that's not really it. I think a lot of times an institution will say it needs a rebrand, but really it needs, how do I say this correctly? It needs a refreshed brand messaging strategy. That really sometimes is the end. And I think that's when the relationship blurs between, in-house and campus partner. Those lines are blurred already between us, right? Because as a good partner, I want to be able to say to you, like, you don't need a full soup to nuts rebrand. That would be foolhardy. What you need is to connect the dots internally with your people through a brand messaging strategy that can then tactically connect the dots between owned, earned, paid, also and social media, all your media at your disposal.
Yeah, and I mean to me that is the mark of a good external partner, somebody that's willing to tell you, in spite of maybe not maximizing their profit or revenue from the project, to tell you what you need and don't need. That's really the mark of a good partner. So I appreciate your point there. Let's talk about the kind of the institution as a whole. I think we've touched on kind of the institutional overarching brand, but a lot of times, and really the points of those listening sessions that I touched on, other departments, colleges, business schools, schools of engineering, and the like have their own unique brands and their own needs and their own audiences. So talk about, Joe, kind of balancing that overarching brand of the institution with the needs of those departments or those kind of college or school level brands.
The first thing I'll say here is that it makes it a lot easier to connect the dots when funds are operationalized for brand management. Now, listen, I get it. Across the board in our industry, that's not possible. But think about this with me. Think about a world in which there is, just like a building has its operationalized funds to keep the escalators running, to make sure that if someone graffitis a wall, that it is cleaned. Think about if the website was operationalized. Think about if marketing execution was operationalized. So that's the first thing. If that's not possible, then we're going back to relationships. So if you're just bringing people together for the first time about a rebrand, chances are you're going to hit more roadblocks than had you already had an apparatus in place to bring people together. So do you have working groups of communicators like what you talked about, those listening sessions? You did it for your web project. Now the key when you come back is you got to keep doing it because you got to own it. You're going to have to be the face of it. So, Do you have working groups of communicators, social media managers? Are you meeting with faculty and departments or the provost office if you have a provost monthly or quarterly at some cadence to talk about what they're up to, what research they're conducting, accolades they're receiving? If not, you got to put those things in place immediately before you go down the path of a refresh. And then the other thing is you have to think about the parts as you think about the whole. So offices and departments and colleges within larger universities each have their own goals, right? And at the end of the day, you have to ensure that their goals and your goals can somehow meet, and brand can be that thing. But I will say that if it's just, I am telling you, this is our core value proposition, and you're not aligned with that, you have done your job wrong. They should be included in that process, have a voice in that process so that they feel like they're champions of that core value proposition. And then you have a conversation about how that CVP can flex for their unit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really illustrates the point that the importance of marketing's seat at the cabinet table. Those, that is especially at large or even, any size institution, marketing's involvement in those conversations and learning about, like you mentioned, the provost office and research and accolades. If we're not part of those conversations, we can't properly promote those things and weave it into our messaging and our brand platform. So, to simplify that, I mean, basically it really, to me, illustrates that the importance of marketing being involved at that level.
Yeah, man. And this is why I'm such a fan of your podcast. And shout out to your last one with Joel. He's such a great guy. And I thought that was such a great conversation about, as someone who has had to execute so many website redesigns, refreshes, reskins, whatever you call it, us addressing the silos is really, really important. And I'm glad that you're doing that with this podcast. But again, I got to go back to, I'm very concerned about the silos that we have as human beings right now, because those are our largest silos. I think it used to be much more institutional.
I think a lot of times, and maybe more so since the pandemic, we get into situations where we start projects and the kind of the personal ownership and stake in the project is the hardest hurdle to overcome when you're talking about working with different folks across campus, because what's important to me and what my goals are not the same for them. And so trying to convince somebody at the start of a project that, hey, you need to add this to your workload, or we need to do this way, is just not going to work if you haven't developed that relationship prior.
Yeah. And you know what? Maybe the most crucial conversation you'll have to get to, solicit champions for your initiative is a conversation about your kids, your conversation about sports, so you can connect with people on a human level.
One of the key kind of themes of this podcast has been the relationships on a personal level between senior level administrators really matter. The people that work the best together that I've talked to are the ones that are legitimately friends and know about each other and spend time together. And it's, we can't underestimate the importance of human connection. Let's shift gears and let's talk about, probably something else that you know about me is that I'm a TV junkie. You probably watch too much TV. I'm always good for a TV recommendation. One of my favorites is The Bear. And it's I think it might be one of your favorites, but in a different context here, I want to talk about The Bear, specifically a piece that you wrote for Volt a couple of weeks ago that folks can find linked in the show notes about the non-negotiables of higher ed brands. If you're familiar with the brand, if you're familiar with the show The Bear, Carnegie, the head chef, the main character of the show, created a list of non-negotiables for his kitchen and his restaurant. And you did the same, Joe, for higher ed brands. So give us a high-level overview of, first of all, the inspiration for that piece and kind of break down the 8 non-negotiables for higher ed brands.
Okay, so one, I saw your tweet. Not your tweet. It's a Blue Sky. It's Blue Sky. So I don't know what
skeet. Is it a post? I don't know what it is.
I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna. What's the show you just? It was
It's
thinking of you. Yeah,
somebody
I need to watch that.
Somebody somewhere. Highly recommend it. It's on HBO.
Let's get into The Bear. So obviously, as someone who worked I was I was a bartender for a long time. I actually met my wife at a restaurant on Long Beach Island called Buckaloo's. Um, and, I ascribe to the Anthony Bourdain school of, uh, I guess, the Tao of Anthony Bourdain, when he said, everything I learned in life, I learned as a dishwasher in a kitchen. And I absolutely believe that that's correct. And from the moment the bear started, I was hooked. And it's not just hooked. I was hooked like I was on Anthony Bourdain, every word that he wrote. I was hooked like I was on hooked to Mad Men. It spoke to me on every level, but really it's about a rebrand.
Yeah.
Carmi comes home after, he's lived some life. He's been in Michelin starred restaurants, and he comes home to, the famous beef, right? Is that the name of the sandwich? The beef. And it's a rebrand, right? So on season 3, I know a lot of people have been hard on season 3.
Spoiler alert for anybody.
Yeah.
All right.
A lot of people
alert.
say that they jumped the shark, but I don't think they went the Fonz that bad on this one. I think it was episode 2 of season 3. Carmi is like, he's going a little crazy, right? Because he's like prostrate under the weight of all that he's done now and all he wants to do, and he wants that Michelin star. So he starts writing these non-negotiables, and there were 27 of them actually. Including some that are just super duplicative, like perfect means perfect was one, clean as you go is one, break down boxes. Anyone who's worked in a restaurant knows you better break down those boxes, because if you don't, you're just hurting yourself later. So he goes into these non-negotiables, and he gives them to Sugar to like, type out, right? So the article was pretty easy to write in that I used ChatGPT. I used Write for Me and uploaded some information. And I said, could you please break this down and make some connections to branding? I got a suitable first draft. And then from there, I kind of, winnowed it down to the 8 non-negotiables. So 1 being of the place, mise en place. Do the foundational work before a project kicks off. 2, less is more. So how can we use a rebranding process or a brand refresh to kind of cut away the fat that we've accumulated over the years on our brand's expression? Then vibrant collaboration, which we spoke about most of what we spoke about today, which is, if this is going to work, it's going to take the whole village. It's going to take advancement in mission, student life, athletics, all the way down to your community partners. No compromises on ingredients, which is really the pursuit of excellence. So, what is brand quality mean to you? And that means, what is the highest quality of work that we put out? Define that first, and then stick to it like a restaurant does. Consolidation and speed, this idea of in and out service. If you want your brand to launch, you got to focus on the processes and the protocols long before that first focus group. And then confidence and competence. Know your shit. Can we say that?
I think so.
Okay, so like, that's great, because you have to address the skills that your team has at its disposal, and the gap in skills it has, the gap in processes, the gap in platforms that it needs. You can use a marketing maturity model to identify where your team is, where your data sources are, where your execution powers are on the spectrum from nascent, I never say that word right, to high performing, and then like plot your course. And then details matter. And the details do matter. Is it authentic? Is what you're doing, is there any adornment you can lose? Are you collaborating? Are you of the highest quality in what you're doing with your brand? Are you the most efficient you can be? Where's your competence level? Where's the confidence level of your team? And then excellence. What are the non-negotiables regarding the proper use of our brand? And then the last one's focus. So this is when I get on the soapbox and say, higher ed always talks about the features. It's like, we think that these truths are self-evident, that we don't need to explain why what we do should matter to someone. Our rankings, faculty to student ratios, pick something. Rankings to what end? Faculty to student ratios to what end? It is our job to always recalibrate focus institutionally, to be that vessel on the cabinet, and even a level or two and 3 or 4 removed, to say, cool, that's a feature. What are the feelings? That's the what. What's the why?
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody the other day that this person was talking about presenting to a board of trustees earlier in their career and talking about you mentioned the vanity metrics, the impressions, clicks, all of those things. And, one of the board members said to her, "That's great, but so what?" And so to your point, so what? We have small class sizes and dedicated faculty and all of those things that every school thinks they have and probably does have faculty that care about students. Great. So what? So that one really resonates with me.
So there was a school I worked with in the Midwest, and it came up in a workshop. It pretty much, the workshop netted a brand essence for this school that is Discover Joy. And I loved that because I kept challenging. The provost of the institution was in the workshop. It was great. I kept challenging all the people in the room to say, cool, to what end? Why? And over again, the word joy kept coming up. And that is something that we need to be thinking about more in higher education. Our why, if it's that mathematical equation, we give you this and you get this, the more we can get our this to something like joy. Now, it's not going to be that for every institution, but you saw the Volvo commercial. You saw the Chevrolet commercial, which appeals much more to an American audience, I would say. And if you haven't, you should watch the Chevy commercial too. Volvos are safe, but I think that the line at the end there was sometimes the most important moments are the ones that never happen.
Mm-hmm.
How brilliant is that?
Yeah, beyond brilliant. Yeah, it reminds me the best brands, the best stories. I think of Apple, I think of Dove, brands like that they're not selling me soap. I mean, that's their end goal, is for me to buy soap, but they're selling me who they are as a company. Apple's selling me how it feels to use their product, because you're an Android user, Joe. Like, there's no Apple iPhone feature that's superior to Android, other than the fact that it makes me feel a certain way to use an iPhone.
Of course,
and that's it.
I'll bring it back to something personal for me. I told you I met my wife in a bar called Buckaloo's, right? That bar is on Center Street on Long Beach Island. Pretty much within 1 mile are most of the bars on that island. And I can go back in time and think about, what was Buckaloo's? In a sea of Dollar SoCo and Lime shots, bars that had the huge cover bands playing. There was the Marlin, there's the Catch, there's the Shell. Buckaloo's brand was very, very evident then, and it still is now. Buckaloo's was Cheers on an island that has been changing, where the mom and pop stores have gone away and they've made room for these huge mega houses that no one lives in. Buckaloo's was that one constant. It was about tradition. That was their essence. It always has been. It always will be. And a sea of, pandering to the tourists. You can take branding in everyday life, and it really, really helps to make those connections. So I could take all the bars on Long Beach Island and make a apples to apples connotation to all of the universities in Pennsylvania. Throw a rock, you hit 3 of them.
Yeah. We're all doing the same thing, but what about our institution is going to make you feel differently and give you that Buckaloo's experience for the rest of your life? And that's the goal.
I don't think there's been one workshop I've led or one strategy presentation that I've delivered where I have not teared up, because it is absolutely wrong to say that it's not personal to me or to anyone who does this work.
Yeah.
It should be personal. If you're not moved, then something's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's more important than ever, really, to tell the story of higher ed and kind of own our story, own our narrative, and kind of take back our voice as institutions. We could talk all day, Joe. I'm always smarter for having spoken to you and having had a conversation with you. And I think our listeners will be after this one as well. So thanks for your knowledge and your insights and your friendship.
Oh, Shane, I'm so glad to know you and to call you a friend and a colleague. Thank you for having me.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Dave Kibilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.